Chapter 3 is all about quadratic functions. So what we're going to do today is we're going to find the vertex of a quadratic function. So remember, your quadratic function is in the form f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And this is for a parabola. So if a is greater than 0, it opens upwards, and if a is less than 0, it opens downwards. So upwards would be like a U, downwards would be like a smooth N. So to find vertex, we have two steps. One is we're going to use the formula x equals negative b over 2a to find the x coordinate of the vertex. Then what we do is once we find x, we sub it into f of x to find the y coordinate. So first example says identify which way the parabola opens and find the vertex of the function f of x equals x or 2x squared plus 2x plus 7. So we look at a first. So here's a. Since a is equal to 2, that means that a is greater than 0, which means it opens upward. Now what I need to do is I need to find my vertex. So in order to find my vertex, first step, I'm going to do x equals negative b over 2a. So 2 is my a, 8 is my b, and 7 is my c. So I'm going to do x equals negative 8 over 2 times 2. Well, this is x equals negative 8 over, well, 2 times 2 is 4. Now 8 divided by 4 is just 2. So I get my vertex x coordinate to be 2. That's all from step 1. Now step 2 says plug in whatever you get for x into the function. So here I'm going to do f of negative 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug it into this function here and see what my y coordinate is. So it's going to be 2 times negative 2 squared plus 8 times negative 2 plus 7. So now I got to simplify that. So this is going to be 2 times 4 minus 16 plus 7. Well, 2 times 4 is just 8. Now I have 8 minus 16 plus 7, and that would give me negative 1, which means my vertex is at the point negative 2, negative 1. So all I do is I use that formula x equals negative b over 2a to find my x coordinate and then plug it back in and see what I get for y. So step 2 in this is now we're going to find all the intercepts and graph the function without a calculator. Well, the vertex, remember, is just the turning point. So I'm going to plot the vertex first. So 2 or negative 2, 1. That's my vertex. Now, from before, one of the first questions we answered is that a was greater than 0, which means it's going to open upward. So I know my graph has to look like this. So now it's just what are the intercepts. To find x-intercepts, remember you have to set the whole equation equal to 0. To find my y-intercepts, I'm going to plug in 0 for x. So I'm going to do f of 0. So those are how you find your x-intercepts and y-intercepts. So let's start with our x. So I have 2x squared plus 8x plus 7 equals 0. So because I have that 2 in front, I'm going to try to do borrow and pay back. So if I do borrow and pay back, I'm going to get x squared plus 8x plus 14. So I have to think of two numbers that multiply to 14 but add up to 8. And the only two numbers that, or four numbers that multiply to 14 is 1 and 14 and 7 and 2. And neither of those add to 8. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do the quadratic equation. So remember, that's x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And that's going to let me know what my x-intercepts are. So it's going to be x equals negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times 2 times 7 all over 2 times 2. So now it's just about simplifying. So I'm going to leave negative 8 alone. Well, 2 squared is just 4, or this should be 8. This should be 8 squared because your b is 8, not 2. So 8 squared is 64. Negative 4 times 2 times 7 would give me 56. And then 2 times 2 would give me 4. So I'm going to add what's in my radical now, or subtract it, I should say. So 64 minus 56 would give me 8. Now, before I can simplify this, I'm going to simplify my radical. So two numbers that multiply to 8 are 4 and 2, and 4 is a perfect square, which means I can pull that out, and I get negative 8 plus or minus 2 radical 2 over 4. So because I see my negative 8, my 2, and my 4, I can divide by the GCF, which is 2. So if I divide 2 by 2, I get 1. 4 by 2 gives you 2. Negative 8 by 2 would give you negative 4. So my answer would be negative 4 plus or minus radical 2 over 2. So let's say I don't know what that is off the top of my head. This is where you can use your calculator, okay? So if I plug that into my calculator, negative 4 plus radical 2 over 2, I get negative 1.29. And then if I plug in negative 4 minus radical 2 over 2, I get negative 2.710. And then comma 0. So remember, these are just points on your x-axis. So if I plot that, I get 1 point here and 1 point here. So that's your x-intercepts. Now for your y-intercept, what we do is we take 0 and plug it in for every x we see. So this is going to be 2 times 0 plus 8 times 0 plus 7. Well, 2 times 0 is just, or 0 squared is 0. 0 times 2 is 0. 8 times 0 is 0 plus 7, which means my y-intercept occurs at 0, 7. So I'm going to plot a point there. So I know it opens upwards from step 1. I have my vertex in purple, and then all my red are my intercepts. So now all I have to do is connect the dots. Lastly, you always have to remember to label your function. So it's f of x equals 2x squared plus 8x plus 7. So that's how you figure out the vertex and then how to graph your function without a calculator. So we have to remember our x and y intercepts. Let's try another example together. So identify which way your graph opens and then find the vertex of this function. So to figure out which way it opens, we look at our a value. So remember, this is a, b, and c. Well, a is equal to negative 1, which means it is less than 0, which means it opens downward. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my vertex. So to find the vertex, remember, we use that formula, x equals negative b over 2a. So it would be x equals negative 6 over 2 times negative 1. So I'm going to simplify the bottom first, so I get negative 6 over negative 2. Well, 6 divided by 2 is just 3. Negative divided by a negative is a positive. So my x value would give me 3. Now part 2 is I have to plug in 3 into my equation. So remember, my equation was negative x, which I'm going to plug in 3, squared, plus 6 times x, which I'm plugging in 3 again, minus 8. So this is going to be negative 9. 3 squared is 9, and then I have that negative out in front. 6 times 3 gives me 18. Bring down the negative 8. So negative 9 plus 18 minus 8 would give me 1. So that means my vertex is at 3, 1. Now part B says identify any intercepts, and then graph that function without a calculator. So I need my vertex, so I'm going to put that point on my graph. So 3, 1, this is my vertex. I know my graph opens downward, so there's my vertex. So part 2 says identified any intercepts. So for x-intercepts, remember you set the whole thing equal to 0. So I have negative x squared plus 6x minus 8 equals 0. Well, I don't like that negative out in front of x squared, so I'm going to divide the whole function by negative 1. So it's going to be x squared minus 6x plus 8 equals 0. So now I can factor. Two numbers that multiply to 8 but add up to negative 6 are negative 2 and negative 4. So now you can tee it up. You set each side equal to 0. And we get x equals 2 and x equals 4. So what that means is those are my two intercepts, so 2, 0 and 4, 0. So I can plot that on my graph now. So 2, 0 is here, 4, 0 is here. So x-intercepts is where it crosses the x-axis. So to find my y-intercept now, what I do is I plug in 0 for x. So I have 0 equals negative 0 squared plus 6 times 0 minus 8. Well, negative 0 squared is just 0. 6 times 0 is 0. So my answer would just be negative 8, which means it crosses the y-axis at 0, negative 8. So if I plot that point, it would be right here. So now you just have to connect your dots. And that's what this function would look like. And remember, you have to label your function. So this is f of x equals negative x squared plus 6x minus 8. So let's try one more. So instead it says sketch the function of f of x equals negative 2x minus 1 squared plus 2. So typically we don't see it in this form. This is called vertex form. So instead I want it in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So let's distribute this first. So PEMDAS says I have to do parentheses and exponents. So I'm going to do x minus 1 squared. So that would be x squared minus 2x plus 1. So now I have to do the parentheses part where I distribute this negative 2 in front to all these terms. So it's going to be negative 2x squared plus 4x minus 2 and then plus 2. So when I add my like terms, I get negative 2x squared plus 4x. So this is f of x in the form we're used to seeing it. So in order to sketch a function, I need to know my intercepts and I need to know my vertex. So we're going to do exactly what we just did before, but this time we're going to sketch it instead of graphing it on a coordinate plane. So to find my vertex, we use that formula again. X equals negative b over 2a. So here my b is 4 and my a is negative 2. So I get negative 4 over negative 4. Well, negative 4 divided by negative 4 is just 1. So x coordinate would be 1. So now I have to plug in 1 in for every x I see. So this is going to be negative 2 times 1 squared plus 4 times 1. So 1 squared is just 1. Negative 2 times 1 would give me negative 2. 4 times 1 is 4. So negative 2 plus 4 would give me 2. So my vertex here is 1, 2. So if it says sketch, all you need to do is draw a set of axes. Here's your x, here's your y. And so far, 1, 2 is my vertex. Before I plot and figure out my x and y intercepts, I want you to take a look at this function. So because it says negative 2, that means that a is less than 0, which means it's going to open downward. So since a is less than 0, your graph's going to open downward. So now I have a better idea of what this graph is going to look like. I'm going to find my intercepts. So to find your x-intercepts, remember we take this whole function and we set it equal to 0. So negative 2x squared plus 4 equals 0. What I'm going to do is I'm going to GCF here. So I can pull out a negative 2 and an x. When I do that, I'm left with x minus 2 in parentheses. So now I can tee it up. Negative 2x equals 0, and then x minus 2 equals 0. When I do that, I get x equals 0 and x equals 2. That means my two x-intercepts are 0, 0 and 2, 0. So coming over to my sketch now, I can plot 0, 0 and then 2, 0. So make sure you also label your vertex as 1, 2. Last part is to figure out what your y-intercept is. So to do that, what you do is you plug in 0 for x. So this is going to be negative 2 times 0 squared plus 4 times 0. Well, negative 2 times 0 squared is 0. 4 times 0 is just 0. So that means my y-intercept is 0, 0, which is okay because it's the same as my x. So now all you have to do is connect the dots and then label your graph with the original function before you expanded it. So this whole video was finding the vertex and then sketching your function. So the vertex is the only thing new. X and Y intercepts came from chapter 2. So now the rest of the sheet is practice. So you can either fill it out right now or you can do it in class. On Tuesday you can do it while the juniors and some of the seniors are on retreat.